The muffled laugh was sharp, a sliver of ice in the climate-controlled air of the luxury airliner. From her seat in the last row, Dr. Alistair Monroe heard it clearly. The flight attendant, a woman with a smile as bright and brittle as porcelain, gestured discreetly towards her, whispering to a colleague. Alistair, a woman who could buy the entire airline with a fraction of her morning's stock market gains, simply turned a page in her book. The attendant saw a black woman in an expensive coat sitting in the cheapest seat on the plane and found it hilarious. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the very ground they were scheduled to land on, every inch of the concrete, every pane of glass in the terminal, every blinking light on the runway, belonged to the woman she was mocking. The flight attendant's reckoning was approaching at 600 miles per hour, and it was going to be anything but a smooth landing. The air in the first-class cabin of Apex Air Flight 772 from Chicago to a private terminal in North Carolina was a carefully curated symphony of quiet luxury. The scent was a bespoke blend of leather-hot towels and the subtle expensive perfume of its occupants. In Seat 2A, Chadwick Chad Peterson stretched his long legs, his Audemars Piguet watch catching the light as he flagged down the flight attendant. "Another champagne, sweetheart. Make it snappy," he said, not bothering to make eye contact. "Of course, Mr. Peterson," the flight attendant cooed. Her name was Tiffany, and her name badge gleamed almost as brightly as the ambition in her eyes. Tiffany had mastered the art of social triangulation in a pressurized cabin. She could spot a CEO, a tech mogul, or an heir from 100 paces. She saw their value, their status, and she mirrored it back at them, hoping a sliver of their golden life might rub off on her. Her colleague, a younger attendant named Chloe, was still learning the ropes. As Tiffany prepared Chad's drink, she leaned in close to Chloe near the galley curtain. "Watch and learn," she whispered. "First class is where the magic happens. Economy is just cargo that breathes." It was this worldview that made the sight of Dr. Alistair Monroe so jarring to Tiffany. Alistair had boarded quietly, one of the first, a habit from years of wanting to settle in without fuss. She wore no flashy jewelry, no logos screamed from her clothing. Instead, she was a portrait of understated elegance, tailored black trousers, a simple silk blouse, and a deep charcoal cashmere coat that draped over her shoulders with the weight of quality, not branding. Her hair was styled in intricate, elegant locks, adorned with a few simple gold cuffs. She carried a single, well-worn leather satchel. Tiffany had watched her walk past the sprawling pods of first class, past the comfortable seats of business class, and continue down the narrow aisle. She'd followed her with her eyes, a frown pinching her brow. The woman looked like she belonged up front. When she saw Alistair stop at seat 34B, the middle seat in the very last row right beside the bustling lavatories, a snort of derisive laughter escaped her lips before she could stifle it. She turned to Chloe, a conspiratorial glint in her eyes. "Did you see that?" she murmured, her voice dripping with condescension. "Dressed for the Met Gala to sit in the toilet row. Some people try so hard to look the part, but they always give themselves away. Probably rented the coat." Chloe giggled nervously, glancing back toward the rear of the plane. Maybe she just booked late. "Please," Tiffany scoffed, straightening her uniform. "People with real money don't book late into the worst seat on the plane. They have people who handle that, or they just fly private." Alistair heard the whispers. The acoustics in an airplane cabin are peculiar. Conversations 50 feet away can sometimes travel with perfect clarity. She didn't react. She didn't zag or turn or glare. Years of navigating boardrooms dominated by men who underestimated her of presenting groundbreaking architectural plans to committees who saw her skin color before her credentials had taught her the immense power of stillness. Reaction was a currency she refused to spend on fools. Instead, she settled into her seat. She had chosen 34B for a very specific, very private reason. The flight was a last-minute decision, a quick trip to perform a final unannounced inspection of her company's latest and perhaps greatest achievement. Seat 34B was one of the last available, yes, but it also offered a perfect unobstructed view of the left wing and its flap assembly during landing approach. She wanted to watch the mechanics feel the specific vibrations as the plane adjusted for landing on a runway system she herself had helped design. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a final anonymous communion with her work before the world celebrated it. A fellow passenger, a kind-faced older man in 34A, struggled to lift his carry-on into the overhead bin. Alistair was on her feet in an instant. "Allow me," she said, her voice warm and low. She easily lifted the bag and settled it into place. "Oh, thank you, dear. Thank you so much," the man said, flustered and grateful. "My back isn't what it used to be." "It's no trouble at all," Alistair replied, with a genuine smile. Tiffany witnessed the exchange from the galley. She rolled her eyes, interpreting the act not as kindness, but as a performance. "See, I'm a good, helpful person. Please don't notice I'm sitting in peasant class." The narrative in Tiffany's head was already written, and every action Alistair took was just another sentence in that prejudiced story. As the plane finished boarding, Tiffany began her pre-flight service, focusing her charm offensive entirely on the front cabin. She laughed at Chad Peterson's unfunny jokes, refilled his glass before it was empty, and asked about his very important business in North Carolina. "Just acquiring a new data analytics firm," Chad said loudly, ensuring the surrounding passengers could hear. "Pocket change, really. A little pet project." In reality, Chad was a senior manager at a mid-level tech company, flying to a mandatory training seminar. The trip was paid for by his company, and the first-class seat was the result of a lucky last-minute upgrade. He was playing a part just as much as Tiffany thought Alistair was, but his performance aligned with Tiffany's expectations, so she rewarded it with fawning attention. When the service cart finally made its way to the back of the plane, Tiffany's demeanor had frosted over. The warm, engaging hostess of first class was replaced by a brusque, efficient dispenser of drinks and snacks. "Drink?" she asked, her eyes scanning the row above Alistair's head. "Just a bottle of water, please," Alistair said politely. Tiffany grabbed a plastic cup, slopped some ice into it from a scoop, and filled it from a large jug. She thrust it towards Alistair. "I asked for a bottle if you have one." Alistair reiterated, her tone still perfectly even. Tiffany let out an exaggerated sigh. "We reserve bottled water for first and business class. You'll have to make do with this." It was a blatant lie, a petty exertion of power. Small bottles of water were standard for all passengers. The man in 34A, who had received a bottle without asking, looked confused. He started to speak up, but Alistair gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent message that said, "It's not worth it." She accepted the cup of water. "Of course," she said, her voice betraying no hint of anger. "Thank you." As Tiffany moved on, she couldn't resist a final parting shot. Leaning towards Chad, who had wandered back to chat with a colleague in business class, she said in a stage whisper, "You wouldn't believe the champagne taste on a beer budget people we get back there." Alistair closed her eyes for a moment, not in anger, but in a sort of weary contemplation. The flight attendant was an annoyance, a minor bug on the windshield of a much larger journey. But her attitude was a symptom of a sickness Alistair had encountered time and time again, the disease of judging a book by a cover you couldn't even read. She took a sip of the iced water, the plastic cup cold against her lips. She wasn't angry. She was calculating. The flight was 3 hours long. Plenty of time. She opened her leather satchel and pulled out a tablet. On the screen, a complex set of architectural blueprints and schematics glowed. It was the master plan for the airport's new terminal and runway system. The airport they were flying to. Blackwood International Airport. Her airport. She zoomed in on the intricate wiring diagram for the runway's central lighting system. The system was named Argus, after the 100-eyed giant of Greek myth. It was her baby, and she was on her way to see it open its eyes for the first time. The irony was thicker than the clouds forming outside her window. Tiffany thought she was sitting in the toilet row, but in reality, Alistair Monroe was sitting in the throne room. And judgment she knew was coming. The cruise phase of a flight is a delicate ecosystem. For most, it's a lull, a time for movies, naps, or staring out at the endless blue. For the crew, it's a period of service and observation. For Tiffany, it was an extended opportunity to cultivate her chosen target, Mr. Chad Peterson, and to reinforce her disdain for the woman in 34B. An hour into the flight, she made another pass through the cabin this time with a basket of warm snacks. In first class, she presented the basket with a flourish. Mr. Peterson, a freshly baked cookie. We have chocolate chunk or white chocolate macadamia nut. Chad took 2 without a word of thanks. When she reached the back of the plane, the basket was almost empty. Only a few broken pieces of the chocolate chunk cookies remained. She offered them to the rows ahead of Alistair, before arriving at row 34, holding out the basket with the sparse remains. "Crumbs, anyone?" she said, her voice flat. The man in 34A politely declined. Alistair didn't even look up from her tablet, her focus absolute. This seemed to irritate Tiffany more than any complaint could have. To be so thoroughly ignored by someone she had already dismissed was an affront to her perceived authority. She cleared her throat loudly. "Ma'am, I'm speaking to you." Alistair slowly raised her eyes from the glowing screen. She blinked once, as if returning from a great distance. "I'm sorry, were you addressing me?" "The cookies," Tiffany said, shaking the basket impatiently. "Do you want one or not? I haven't got all day." "No, thank you," Alistair replied, her gaze returning to the complex schematics on her tablet. The screen showed a 3D rendering of an air traffic control tower, which she was rotating with a flick of her finger. Tiffany caught a glimpse of the intricate designs. She couldn't comprehend what they were, but she saw them as another pretension. Probably playing some fancy video game to look smart, she thought. She turned on her heel and marched back to the galley, her frustration simmering. Meanwhile, Alistair was deep at work. She was running a final diagnostic simulation on the airport's power grid integration. Her company, Monroe Axiom, hadn't just built the physical structures of Blackwood International. They had designed the entire operational nervous system. The Argus lighting system, the baggage handling robotics, the security sensor network, the communication arrays. It was all interconnected, a symphony of technology she had personally conducted. This flight, this anonymous seat, was her final quiet overview before the grand opening the following week. A short time later, a small commotion rippled through the economy cabin. A child a few rows ahead of Alistair was crying inconsolably. His mother was trying to soothe him, looking erasingly stressed. The boy was tugging at his ear, his face flushed. Tiffany approached with the warmth of a glacier. "Ma'am, you need to control your child. He's disturbing the other passengers." "I'm trying," the young mother said, her voice trembling. "I think his ears are hurting from the pressure. I can't get him to calm down." "Well, you need to try harder," Tiffany snapped before turning away to attend to a call button from the business class cabin. Alistair watched for a moment, her brow furrowed with concern. She unbuckled her seatbelt, stood up, and approached the distressed mother. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I don't mean to intrude, but I have children. Sometimes a simple distraction is the best medicine." The mother looked up, grateful for a kind face. "I've tried everything." Alistair leaned down to the child's level. "Hello there," she said, her voice a low, calming hum. "I have a secret to show you." She pulled out her tablet, switching from the complex airport schematics to a simple, colorful app she kept for her own young niece. It was an interactive game where touching the screen made stars burst and swirl with gentle musical sounds. The boy, intrigued, stopped crying. He looked at the screen, his tear-filled eyes wide with wonder. "You can touch it," Alistair encouraged. Hesitantly, the boy reached out a small finger and tapped the screen. A kaleidoscope of colors erupted, accompanied by a soft chime. A tiny giggle escaped his lips. He tapped again and again, completely absorbed. The crying ceased. "Oh my goodness," the mother whispered, relief washing over her face. Thank you so much." "What is your name?" "Alistair," she replied simply. "I'm glad I could help." She returned to her seat, leaving the tablet with the mother and child. From the front of the plane, Tiffany had seen the interaction. Her interpretation was, as always, filtered through her own prejudice. She saw Alistair currying favor, putting on a show of being the benevolent lady for the benefit of the other passengers. It was to her an act of profound arrogance. She griped to Chloe in the galley. "Now she's playing super nanny. Can you believe the nerve? Probably expects a round of applause. And using some expensive tablet as a toy. It's all for show." The remainder of the flight passed, with Tiffany making a point of delivering exemplary, effusive service to the front cabins, while treating the economy section with brisk, bordering on rude efficiency. She offered hot towels to first and business class, a service not typically provided on this route, pointedly stopping the cart just at the curtain. She refreshed Chad Peterson's drink so many times that his speech began to slur. All the while, Alistair sat calmly, sometimes closing her eyes in thought, sometimes making notes on a small pad she'd taken from her satchel. She was a picture of serene composure. To Tiffany, this calmness was the ultimate perversion. It was the calm of someone who thought they were better than everyone else, who floated above the petty concerns of their surroundings. She had no idea how right she was, or in what ways. As the plane began its initial descent, the captain's voice came over the intercom. It was Captain Robert Davies, a veteran pilot with a steady, reassuring tone. "Good afternoon, folks. This is Captain Davies. We're beginning our descent towards Blackwood International Airport. We should be on the ground in approximately 40 minutes. The weather on the ground is clear, a beautiful day in North Carolina. Cabin crew, please prepare for landing." Alistair felt a small thrill of anticipation. This was the moment. She pressed her face closer to the window, her eyes fixed on the wing as the flaps began to extend, altering the aerodynamics for the approach. The plane banked gently, and through the clouds she caught her first glimpse of the ground. She could see the sprawling, immaculate layout of her airport. The gleaming new terminal, the perfectly paved taxiways, and the two parallel runways dark and pristine against the green landscape. It was perfect. Tiffany made her final pass through the cabin, collecting trash and ensuring seatbelts were fastened. When she reached row 34, she saw the tablet was still with the child, who was now fast asleep, The device clutched in his hands. "You're going to have to get your property back," she said to Alistair, her voice sharp. "I need to stow all large electronic devices for landing." "Of course," Alistair said. "Let the boy sleep for another minute. I'll retrieve it before the final approach." "The final approach is now, ma'am." Tiffany lied, her patience gone. "I need it now." Alistair looked at her, and for the first time a flicker of something other than calm crossed her face. It was a cool, analytical assessment. She was no longer observing a social phenomenon. She was evaluating a problem. "Very well," she said. She gently woke the mother, retrieved her tablet with a soft word of thanks, and placed it back in her satchel under the seat in front of her. Tiffany watched a smug little smile on her lips. She had won this tiny battle of wills. She had put the woman in the cheap seat in her place. As she walked back to her jump seat, she felt a surge of satisfaction. The flight was almost over. Soon this irritatingly serene woman would be gone, swallowed up by the anonymity of the arrivals hall, while she, Tiffany, would be helping real VIPs like Mr. Peterson with their connections. She had no idea that for Alistair Monroe, the journey wasn't ending. She was coming home. And for Tiffany, the final judgment was just about to begin. The descent was smooth, a textbook approach under a clear sky. Captain Davies was relaxed in the cockpit, running through the final landing checklist with his first officer. "Landing gear. Down 3 green. Flaps. Set for landing. Blackwood Tower. This is Apex 772, established on the ILS for runway 27L. The voice from the tower came back crisp and clear. "Apex 772 Blackwood Tower. You are cleared to land runway 27L. Wind is calm." In her seat, Alistair watched the landscape resolve itself from a patchwork of colors into distinct fields, roads, and buildings. Her airport grew larger, a testament to 5 years of relentless work. She saw Terminal A, the main commercial hub, and the more exclusive Terminal B, the Executive Onyx Lounge, where this flight was destined. And then she saw it. Or rather, she didn't see it. The Argus system had a daytime signature. Even under the bright sun, the embedded LED edge lights of the runway and the precision approach path indicator lights, the PPIs, should have been visible, a faint but distinct string of jewels guiding the way. The runway was dark, utterly inertly dark. Alistair's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a bulb being out. This was a system-wide failure. In the cockpit, Captain Davies saw it at the same moment. "I've lost the PPI lights," he said, his voice tight. "And the runway edge lights are out. Tower confirm status of runway 27L lighting." A pause, and then the controller's voice came back, laced with a new urgency. "Apex 772. We are showing a cascading failure in the Argus system. Stand by." "A cascading failure," the first officer muttered. "That system is brand new, supposed to be foolproof." "Nothing is foolproof." Davies grunted, his hands expertly keeping the aircraft stable. "Blackwood Tower. What's your directive?" "Apex 772, go around," the voice from the tower commanded. "I repeat, execute a go-around. Do not attempt to land. We are closing the airport. All inbound traffic is being diverted." The captain's voice, now stripped of its earlier warmth, came over the PA system. "Folks, this is the captain. We've encountered a minor technical issue with the airport's runway systems. We're going to abort this landing attempt and enter a holding pattern while they get it sorted out. We'll keep you updated." A collective groan went through the cabin. In first class, Chad Peterson was livid. "Unacceptable," he yelled at Tiffany. "I have a meeting. Get the captain out here. I need to know what's going on." I'll see what I can find out. Mr. Peterson, Tiffany stammered, her own composure cracking under the pressure of a real crisis. But Alistair wasn't groaning. She was in motion. The casual observer had vanished, replaced by the CEO and chief systems architect of Monroe Axiom. Her mind was racing, processing the controller's words, cascading failure. That meant a domino effect. One system's failure triggering another and another. It was the one scenario her engineers had spent a year designing safeguards against. And it was happening. She pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. She didn't need a signal to access the device's stored memory. She pulled up the core schematics for the Argus system's power distribution and its software handshake protocols. There were triple redundancies. A catastrophic failure should have been impossible. Unless it wasn't a hardware failure at all. It's the software patch, she whispered to herself. 2 days ago, her lead engineer had pushed a minor update to optimize power consumption. It had been tested in simulations, but a simulation could never perfectly replicate the complex, chaotic environment of a live airport. Alistair knew she had to get a message to the ground. She activated her tablet's satellite Wi-Fi, a premium service she'd purchased before the flight. A connection icon blinked and then turned solid green. She bypassed her usual corporate channels and sent a single encrypted text message to a number only she and 2 other people in her company had. It was the direct line to David Chen, her chief operating officer, who she knew was waiting for her in the Onyx lounge. The message was simple, code black. Argus system. It's the patch. Initiate Protocol Omega. I am on Apex. 772. In the exclusive lounge of Terminal B, David Chen, a man known for his unflappable demeanor, was looking out the window at the suddenly dark runway when his phone buzzed with a unique, jarring tone. He looked at the screen, and his blood froze. Code Black was a designation they had never used, reserved for a theoretical company-threatening crisis. Protocol Omega was Alistair's ghost protocol, a complete manual override of the entire airport's automated systems, controllable only from the central engineering hub deep beneath the terminal. A protocol only she could authorize. He immediately dialed the airport's director of operations. This is David Chen from Monroe Axiom. We have a code black. The owner is airborne on one of the planes you just sent around, and she has identified the problem. I need you and your head engineer at the central hub in 2 minutes. Move. Back on the plane, Alistair knew she needed more information. She needed to talk to the flight crew. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Tiffany, who was rushing back from placating Chad, saw her and immediately moved to intercept. Ma'am, sit down. The seatbelt sign is on. You are endangering yourself and others. I need to speak to the captain. Alistair said, her voice calm, but carrying an authority that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't a request. Nobody speaks to the captain during a situation like this, Tiffany retorted, puffing out her chest. He is busy flying the plane. Now sit down. She placed a hand on Alistair's arm to physically push her back. Alistair didn't flinch. She looked down at the hand on her arm, then back up at Tiffany's face. The look in her eyes was one of pure, concentrated power. Take your hand off me, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet level. You have no idea the situation we are in, and you are currently obstructing the only person on this aircraft who can resolve it. The sheer force of her personality made Tiffany hesitate. In that moment of hesitation, the senior flight attendant, a calm and experienced purser named Marcus, arrived. What's going on here? Marcus asked, his eyes darting between the two women. "This passenger is refusing to take her seat during a critical phase of flight," Tiffany said, regaining her footing. "I need to provide information to the captain that is essential for the safety of this aircraft and our ability to land," Alistair stated, clearly looking directly at Marcus. "The problem with the airport, I know what it is. My company built it. My name is Dr. Alistair Monroe. I am the owner of Monroe Axiom, and I own Blackwood International Airport." The words hung in the air. Tiffany stared, her mouth slightly agape. A flicker of disbelief warred with the sudden, terrifying realization that this woman was not lying. The quiet confidence, the expensive but unbranded coat, the calm demeanor. It all clicked into place in the most horrifying way. Marcus, however, was a professional. He had seen it all in his 25 years of flying. He didn't have time to process the social implications. He had to assess the claim's validity in the context of a potential emergency. "Can you prove that?" he asked Alistair, his tone serious. Alistair didn't fumble for an ID. She simply said, "Tell the captain that the cascading failure in the Argus system is a software handshake error originating from the K14 patch pushed 48 hours ago. Tell him he needs to have the tower's lead engineer initiate Protocol Omega. If he asks for authorization, tell him the code is Axiom 01. He will understand." The level of specific technical detail was staggering. It was not something a passenger could guess. Marcus's eyes widened. He made an instant decision. "Right this way, Doctor," he said, gesturing towards the front of the plane. He turned to the stunned Tiffany. "Stay here. Handle the cabin." As Alistair walked past, her gaze briefly met Tiffany's. There was no triumph in Alistair's eyes, no "I told you so." There was only the focused, implacable look of a person with a critical job to do. Tiffany stumbled back against a seat, her mind reeling. The woman in the toilet row. The woman she had mocked, dismissed, and insulted. The woman she had accused of having champagne taste on a beer budget. That woman owned the ground beneath them. She owned the air they were circling in. And right now, she held the fate of every single person on that plane, including Tiffany, in her hands. The floor of the airplane suddenly felt like it had dropped out from under her, and she was falling into a chasm of her own making. The cockpit of Apex 772 was a bubble of intense, controlled pressure. Captain Davies, a man whose face was a road map of transatlantic flights, was skillfully maneuvering the large aircraft in its designated holding pattern. The sky outside was a serene blue, a stark contrast to the tension within. "They're trying to reboot the entire system," the first officer reported, listening to the chatter from air traffic control. "It's not responding. They have no runway lights, no approach guidance, nothing. They're talking about diverting us to Charlotte. That's a 90-minute flight, plus whatever holding pattern they put us in there," Davies muttered. "We'll have fuel concerns. Not critical yet, but getting there." A soft knock came from the cockpit door. "Captain," Marcus's voice said through the interphone, "I have a passenger here you need to speak with. It's an urgent matter regarding the situation on the ground." Davies's brow furrowed in annoyance. "Marcus, I'm a little busy right now." "Sir, you need to hear this," Marcus insisted. "Her name is Dr. Alistair Monroe. She claims she owns the airport. She says the problem is a software handshake error from a K14 patch, and that you need to tell the tower to initiate Protocol Omega. The authorization code is Axiom 01. Silence filled the cockpit. Davies and his first officer exchanged a look of disbelief. The terminology was too precise, too esoteric. Protocol Omega. It sounded like something out of a spy movie, but in the world of proprietary high-tech systems, it was chillingly plausible. Axiom 01. Monroe Axiom was the firm that had built Blackwood. "Let her in," Davies said, his voice now grim. Marcus opened the door, and Alistair stepped into the cramped space. She took in the myriad of glowing dial screens and switches with the practiced eye of an engineer, not a tourist. "Captain Davies," she said, her voice steady, "I apologize for the intrusion." "Dr. Monroe," Davies replied, his skepticism still warring with the evidence. "You've made some extraordinary claims." "Which are true," Alistair said, cutting to the chase. "I'm patched into my COO on the ground via the plane's satellite link. The system reboot won't work because the faulty patch is embedded in the startup kernel. Every time it reboots, it reloads the error. They are wasting time. You need to land." "Land where?" the first officer asked, incredulous. "On a dark runway, it's a visual flight rules day." "Yes, but our company policy for an airport of this class requires electronic guidance. It's a non-starter." "The guidance isn't dead, it's just dormant," Alistair explained her authority, filling the small space. "Protocol Omega is a hardwired manual override. It bypasses the central software entirely and allows the tower to control the core lighting functions directly circuit by circuit. It's a failsafe I designed for exactly this type of scenario. My team on the ground is ready to activate it, but they need you, the pilot in command, to see what they are doing and confirm it from the air." She held up her tablet. "I have the schematics right here. I can talk your first officer through what he'll be seeing so you can focus on the approach." Captain Davies looked at her, at the unwavering confidence in her eyes, at the impossible-to-fake expertise radiating from her. He had been flying for 30 years. He knew the difference between panic and professionalism, between a crank and a commander. This woman was a commander. He keyed his microphone. "Blackwood Tower, Apex 772. I'm here with a Dr. Alistair Monroe of Monroe Axiom. She advises you to cease reboot attempts and activate Protocol Omega. The authorization code is Axiom 01. Please confirm you have Monroe Axiom personnel in the tower." The reply from the tower was almost instantaneous. The controller's voice filled with a mixture of relief and astonishment. "Apex 772 confirmed. We have Mr. Chen of Monroe Axiom here. He confirms the protocol. Stand by. We're initiating Omega now." Back in the main cabin, time had slowed to a crawl. Tiffany was a ghost mechanically performing her duties, her mind a whirlwind of horror and humiliation. Every polite "thank you" from a passenger felt like an accusation. Every glance felt like a condemnation. She kept replaying her own words in her head. Dressed for the Met Gala to sit in the toilet row. Rented the coat. Champagne taste on a beer budget. She looked towards the front of the plane at the closed cockpit door. The woman she had belittled was in there, possibly saving all their lives. The irony was a physical weight crushing her. Chad Peterson was still complaining. "What's taking so long? This is the worst service I've ever experienced. I'm going to have this whole airline comped for my trouble." For the first time, Tiffany looked at him and saw him for what he was, a loud, entitled man of no real importance. His expensive watch and arrogant demeanor were a costume just as she had accused Alistair of wearing one. But his costume was cheap, gaudy, and unconvincing. Alistair's quiet elegance had been the real thing all along, and she had been too blind to see it. In the cockpit, a new voice patched through the radio overriding the controller. "Captain Davies, this is David Chen. Dr. Monroe. Are you there?" "I'm here." "David," Alistair said, leaning towards the communication console. "We're in." David's voice confirmed. Protocol Omega is active. We have manual control of the grid. It's going to be rudimentary, but it will work. I can activate the runway edge lights and the PAPI system, but they might flicker. I can't guarantee a stable connection. It's all we need, Captain Davies interjected. Just give me a line to follow. Doctor, what's our approach vector? David asked. Alistair looked at the flight display. We're in a standard holding pattern. Captain, can you begin a wide approach to re-intercept the ILS path for 27L? David, I want you to activate the lights in sequence. Start with the threshold lights, then the edge lights, section by section, as we approach. We'll confirm visual on each segment before we proceed. For the next 10 minutes, an extraordinary collaboration took place. A CEO in the cockpit of a commercial airliner, a COO in a subterranean engineering hub, and a veteran pilot worked in concert using a multi-billion-dollar airport like a simple flashlight. David, I have visual on the threshold lights, the first officer said. They're on. Confirmed, Alistair said into the comms. Activate first quadrant edge lights. On the ground, a string of brilliant white lights blinked on, cutting a sharp line in the afternoon sun. I see them. Davies said, his hands steady on the controls. It's a solid line. Bring us in. He banked the plane, lining it up with the illuminated runway. Inside the cabin, passengers who had been nervously looking out the windows began to cheer as they saw the runway lights coming to life. They didn't know the story behind it. They only knew it meant they were going home. Tiffany stood near her jump seat, frozen, watching the miracle unfold outside the window. She saw the lights blink on, and knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the woman in 34B was responsible. She felt a profound sense of dread, a feeling that her life was about to be irrevocably altered and not for the better. Gear down and locked, flaps final, the first officer called out. The plane descended perfectly aligned. Alistair stood behind the pilots, watching her creation guided by her own voice. Welcome the aircraft home. The wheels touched the tarmac with a gentle puff of smoke, a perfect landing under impossible circumstances. As the plane slowed and turned onto the taxiway, Captain Davies turned in his seat and looked at Alistair. The skepticism was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated respect. Dr. Monroe, he said, his voice filled with awe. I've been flying for 30 years. I've never seen anything like that. On behalf of my crew and passengers, thank you. You were the one flying the plane, Captain, Alistair replied with a small, tired smile. I just helped turn on the lights. Her work in the air was done. But her work on the ground was about to begin, and she knew exactly who her first order of business would be. As Apex 772 taxied towards the sleek obsidian structure of the Onyx Lounge terminal, it became clear this was no ordinary arrival. Emergency vehicles, their lights flashing silently, were pulling back to their stations. On the tarmac near Gate 1, a small official-looking delegation was forming. From her window seat, Alistair saw David Chen, his tie slightly askew, standing next to a stern-looking man in a sharp suit she recognized as George Morrison, the airport's director of operations. Several other figures in dark suits, a mix of her own executive team and airport authorities, stood behind them. A gleaming black sedan, the kind that whispers of serious power, was parked discreetly nearby. Inside the plane, the passengers were buzzing with relief and excitement, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded behind the cockpit door. They were just happy to have landed safely. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Captain Davies's voice came over the PA one last time. "Folks, on behalf of Apex Air, I want to thank you for your patience, and I'd like to ask you to remain in your seats for just a moment longer. We have some official personnel meeting the aircraft. We'll have you on your way shortly." Tiffany, who had been on autopilot, felt a fresh wave of panic. Official personnel. They weren't there for a routine check. They were there for the woman she had spent the last 3 hours tormenting. Alistair stood up and collected her single leather satchel. She gave a nod to the now worshipping Marcus, who simply replied, "It was an honor, Doctor." She made her way down the aisle. Passengers moved aside, sensing the invisible aura of importance that now surrounded her. As she passed the front cabin, Chad Peterson, oblivious, tried to flag her down. "Hey, you were in the cockpit. What's the deal? Are we getting some kind of compensation for this mess I have places to be?" Alistair didn't even break her stride. She looked past him as if he were a piece of furniture, her focus entirely on the aircraft door, which was just beginning to open. The jet bridge connected with a soft bump. The door hissed open, and Captain Davies himself was there to see her off. "Monroe, again, my deepest gratitude." "The gratitude is mine, Captain," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Your professionalism was exemplary. Please extend my thanks to your first officer." She then stepped out of the aircraft and onto the jet bridge. David Chen rushed forward to meet her. "Alistair, are you all right?" "I'm fine, David. A little more eventful than I planned," she said with a wry smile. "Report." "The patch is being scrubbed from the system. We're running on the stable backup kernel until your engineers can issue a full diagnostic and rewrite. Full operations should resume within the hour. George is deeply apologetic." George Morrison, the airport director, stepped forward, his face pale. "Dr. Monroe, I cannot begin to apologize for what happened, for the system to fail." "The system did not fail George," Alistair corrected him, her voice sharp but not unkind. "A human error was made. The fail-safe, however, worked as designed. That is what matters. We will have a full post-mortem on Monday. Right now, there is another matter I need to attend to." She turned her head slightly, her gaze directed back at the airplane door. "I need to have a word with one of the flight attendants." Back on the plane, Tiffany was watching this scene unfold. She saw the deference, the respect, the sheer power radiating from the delegation on the jet bridge as they addressed Alistair. Her stomach churned. The reality of her mistake was no longer an abstract concept. It was a living, breathing tableau of her own professional demise. Marcus approached her, his face unreadable. "Dr. Monroe has requested your presence on the jet bridge." "Me?" Tiffany whispered, her voice barely audible. "Now, Tiffany," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Walking from her jump seat to the door felt like the longest walk of her life. Every eye in the cabin seemed to follow her. She felt their judgment, real or imagined. She stepped out onto the jet bridge, which now felt like a sterile, lonely stage. Alistair stood there, flanked by David and George. She had taken off her cashmere coat, revealing the simple but exquisitely cut silk blouse. She looked calm, powerful, and utterly in control. "Tiffany," Alistair began, her voice even and devoid of emotion. "For the past 3 hours you have been my primary point of contact with Apex Air. In that time you have demonstrated a profound and frankly dangerous lack of judgment." Tiffany opened her mouth to speak, to apologize, to make an excuse, but Alistair held up a hand, silencing her. "This is not a negotiation. This is an assessment. You judged me based on my race and my seat number. You assumed I was pretending that I was lesser. You used your minimal authority to engage in petty acts of power like denying me a bottle of water and speaking to me with contempt. Your colleague Chloe learned from your example. She gestured back towards the plane. In that cabin are over 100 people. Some are wealthy, some are not. Some are kind, some are rude. But all of them were your responsibility. Your job is safety and service, not social commentary, not class enforcement. Tiffany's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. That is the entire point. Alistair cut in her voice like steel. You didn't know. You didn't know who I was. You didn't know the man in 34A had a bad back. You didn't know the mother with the crying child needed compassion, not criticism. You don't see passengers. You see a collection of assumptions and prejudices. Today your assumptions were about me. Tomorrow you might assume a passenger having a heart attack is just drunk. Your lack of perception is not just an insult, it's a liability. From the group behind Alistair, another man stepped forward. He wore a uniform with the Apex Air logo and a badge that read, Frank Haskell, Chief of In-Flight Services. Alistair's team had summoned him the moment she'd sent her code black message. Tiffany, Frank Haskell said, his voice grim. Dr. Monroe is the owner of this airport. She is also one of our most valued strategic partners. Her company is currently designing the fleet-wide satellite communications upgrade for our airline, an upgrade that will save this company millions. Her word carries significant weight. He paused, letting the reality sink in. Your behavior as reported by Dr. Monroe and corroborated by the purser, Mr. Marcus, is a gross violation of our code of conduct. It is grounds for immediate dismissal. The words hit Tiffany like a physical blow. No. Please, it was just a mistake, a terrible mistake. It was a pattern of behavior over a 3-hour period, Alistair stated coldly. And it ends now. Frank Haskell nodded. Tiffany, your employment with Apex Air is terminated effective immediately. Please surrender your company ID and crew credentials to me. Security will escort you from the premises. Tiffany stared in disbelief, tears streaming down her face. She looked past Alistair pleadingly, but Alistair's face was like stone. It wasn't about revenge. It was about consequence. As a security guard gently but firmly took her arm, the last of the passengers began to deplane. Chad Peterson swaggered out, still looking for someone to complain to. He saw the scene, the crying flight attendant, the men in suits. He looked at Alistair, then at Tiffany, being led away, and a flicker of understanding finally dawned on his face. He paled and quickly scurried away, swallowed by the crowd, just another insignificant man who had bet on the wrong horse. Alistair watched for a moment as Tiffany was escorted down a service corridor, a portrait of shattered pride. There was no joy in it for her, only a grim sense of necessity. She had not set out to ruin a woman's career, but she would not tolerate a rot that threatened the integrity of the systems she built, whether those systems were made of concrete and steel or of human service. She turned to Frank Haskell. I want a full review of your customer service and sensitivity training programs. My office will be in touch on Monday to schedule a meeting. We can do better. Yes, Dr. Monroe, he said immediately. Absolutely. With that, Alistair Monroe turned and walked towards the waiting sedan, leaving the chaos and the consequences behind her. She had a grand opening to prepare for. The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity at Blackwood International Airport. The flawed software patch was analyzed, the vulnerability traced to a single line of corrupted code, and a more robust, secure version was developed and triple-tested under Alistair's direct supervision. The grand opening went off without a hitch. Governors, senators, and aviation magnates, toured the gleaming facility, praising its efficiency and visionary design. They lauded its creator, Dr. Alistair Monroe, a woman whose name was now synonymous with cutting-edge infrastructure. Few knew that the airport's first true test had come a week earlier in a moment of crisis, guided to resolution by a voice from 30,000 feet. The story of Flight 772, however, did not remain entirely secret. Within Apex Air, it became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered in galleys and briefing rooms. The purser Marcus was promoted to a training supervisor role, his calm professionalism during the incident held up as the gold standard. Chloe, the junior attendant, was required to undergo intensive retraining, her near miss, with career disaster serving as a harsh but effective lesson. For Tiffany, the aftermath was a free fall. Fired for cause from a major airline with a "do not rehire" flag on her record, she found herself effectively blacklisted from the industry. Her dream of a glamorous life in the sky was gone. She tried applying for other customer-facing jobs, high-end retail luxury hospitality, but her bitterness and shattered confidence were palpable. The radiant, if brittle, smile she had once perfected was gone, replaced by a permanent look of resentment. She ended up working at a soulless call center, fielding complaints about faulty modems, her voice a monotone drone. The universe, with its cruel sense of irony, had demoted her from serving champagne in first class to becoming the disembodied voice of someone else's frustration. Her fall was not just professional, it was existential. She had built her identity on a foundation of superficial judgment, and when that foundation was proven wrong in the most spectacular way, the entire structure of her life collapsed. Alistair Monroe never spoke of the incident with Tiffany again. She was not a person who dwelled on retribution. She was a builder. Her focus was on the future. True to her word, her team initiated a partnership with Apex Air to overhaul their training programs. 3 months after the incident, Alistair sat in a conference room with Frank Haskell and the airline's executive board. They were reviewing the new passenger-first training module, a program built around empathy, situational awareness, and the core principle of treating every individual with dignity regardless of their appearance, seat number, or perceived status. The program used an anonymized case study. It detailed a flight where a disruptive flight attendant had misjudged a passenger who turned out to be a crucial expert during an unexpected emergency. It outlined the attendant's repeated microaggressions, her poor decision-making, and the ultimate disastrous consequences for her career. "This case study is brutal," one of the VPs commented, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "But effective. It's a reminder," Alistair said, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "An airport isn't just concrete and glass. An airline isn't just engines and wings. They are systems of people, and a system is only as strong as its most prejudiced component. We build redundancies for technical failures. We must also build them for failures of character." As the meeting concluded, Frank Haskell walked with her towards the elevator. "You know, Doctor," he said, "what you did. It sent a shockwave through the entire company. People are more aware. They're thinking twice. You didn't just save a flight that day. You might have changed a whole corporate culture." Alistair simply nodded. "Good," she said. "That's a start." The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside. As she descended, she caught her reflection in the polished steel. She saw the same woman who had sat in seat 34B, dressed in simple elegance, holding a leather satchel. She was not defined by her wealth or her power, but by what she chose to build with it. And on that day in the skies over North Carolina, She had been forced to dismantle one small, hateful thing in order to build something better and more resilient in its place. The architecture of consequence was in its own way as complex and important as any runway or terminal she would ever design, and the foundation was always unfailingly character. That descent into Blackwood International Airport became more than just the end of a flight. It was a powerful collision between prejudice and reality. Alistair Monroe's story serves as a stark reminder that true power and worth are not always loud, branded, or seated in first class. They often travel quietly, observing the world with a calm and calculating eye. The flight attendant, Tiffany, didn't just lose her job. She lost the lens through which she viewed the world, a lens that was shattered by the very person she tried to diminish. Her experience underscores a timeless truth. The consequences of our actions, especially those born from arrogance and prejudice, have a way of finding us. The universe doesn't always settle its accounts immediately, but when it does, the reckoning can be absolute. If this story of quiet strength and profound consequence resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up to help us share it with more people. Don't forget to share it with a friend, and make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We have many more real-life stories coming that explore the unexpected ways our choices define our destiny. Thank you for listening.